Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the south-afrifur podcast. You're listening to myself, Ivik Wolf, and we have our famous guest, Jakabe Rabbit.
Hi.
Yeah, who is on with us tonight? Obviously, our co-host Scratch. Firstly, I would actually also like to apologize for the fact that we haven't necessarily been on air in any kind of live or podcast format for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'm lost in time currently, but yeah, it's probably been about 2 or 3 weeks that we haven't necessarily been online, and I do apologize for that. It's been a bit of a struggle, especially with like this time of year, and to be able to get everything right, and like everything is happening almost at the exact same time. So we do apologize for that, and we're glad that we're back with you. So on to Jakabe. If you could just give us a little rundown about who you are and how you are, for instance.
Okay, sure. My name is Jakabe. I am a jackalope.
Hmm.
That's fairly obvious from the name, but I've been in the furry fandom since 1996. And during that time, I've kind of done a lot. I've been kind of a sort of a podcaster, a writer. I've been a panelist on a number of panels at various conventions. Um, and generally just really love the fandom and engaging in it in any way that I can. Uh,
Okay, so when it comes to engaging with the fandom, like how exactly does that sort of play in? Like, what exactly has the fandom, in essence, done to make anyone want to sort of like join it and things like that, especially from, any kind of perspective? How does that sort of happen from your personal perspective then?
sure. I can't speak generally, but I can speak for myself, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
When I came into the fandom, I was in high school, and a little bit of background. I grew up in kind of like inner city Baltimore, right? Uh, really kind of monocultural. It was just kind of poor black people uh, in my neighborhood for most of my life, and I was kind of like an outsider. I was a geek from the age of like 6, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was really into comic books. I really loved reading. I was really quiet, and I really actually loved schoolwork. So it was a bit difficult for me to kind of fit in to that culture just because I was not really buying into a lot of the things that my culture said that you had to do, right, as a
Mm-hmm.
black male. So um, I found the furry fandom through this "What is a furry" fact sheet. Uh,
In
when
1996.
In 1996, it was a different time on the internet then. Fact sheets were kind of a big thing. Like news groups were still around, and mucks and muds were kind of like the big social spots, right?
It's a
Um,
shame, honestly, but yeah, that they
yeah,
don't. Yeah, carry on.
well, it's kind of like I think F list sort of has taken up
Mm,
that mantle, sort of. Um,
I have
Yeah,
other issues with that.
I see where you're getting at, but yeah, it's
yeah,
less
it has a
wholesome.
ways to go before being like a great like hangout spot. But anyway,
F list has its place.
yeah.
We'll put it like that.
Uh, but
Yeah.
I found Furry Muck actually through that fact sheet and got an account. I think the very next day, and that was it. Um, for me, it was kind of like finding out that Narnia is real, right? Like there's this whole other world that you've always kind of dreamed about, but never gotten to see. And
Mm.
you find out that like, yeah, there's this world full of like talking animals and people who are really into the things that you're into, and the world makes sense in this way that you've always kind of yearned for, but never quite gotten. And so for me,
Mm.
that was kind of like the big thing when I discovered the fandom, is that like there there's this whole community of people who are into the same things that I am, and who kind of share a lot of those sensibilities. And for a 16-year-old black kid, like that was, I mean, it was incredible. It really, literally changed my life.
That's so
Okay, so that really is cool. And now I'm doing math.
cool. 22 years.
Yeah, about 22 years. Which is,
22.
it makes me feel so old thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, and now, I mean, considering that we're going to talk about age for a couple of seconds. So 1996 to 2018, that's 22 years that you've been part of the fandom. Like, what do you think actually has changed within the fandom? Like, is there sort of like a general shift that you felt within the populace, within the idea of social media? Obviously, like it's gotten a lot bigger. There are a lot more voices within the entire scope of the way that we speak to one another. I mean, like 1996, for instance, like if I just have to give myself a little bit of context, in 1996, I was
8.
I think, yes. Yeah, I was 8, but I was sitting in the at the Washington. Okay, there's apparently a lot of distortion, just letting you know.
Oh.
Scratch. I don't hear any distortion on my side, but like I don't necessarily know if that's something we
Is,
can fix. Or not.
is that any better? Just, yeah.
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll find out just now. But like, I was in Washington D.C., 1996, on the day that the flame actually went past the embassy for the Olympics during that time.
Oh, wow.
Like, and I had no idea about what like furry was at that point. I was born in 1988, so in 1996, I was 10. No, 8. 8 years old.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so I mean, like I
Pretty
spent
young.
like, yeah, and that was like my first sort of like, oh my god, there's a world out there kind of moment. But like,
Oh, wow.
how exactly was it for you? Like, what exactly did that particular time mean to you when as soon as you found the furry fan?
Well, I think it opened me up to this possibility of, I guess, being accepted or being understood in a way that I hadn't been before. But also that, hey, I could do anything. I could, like live with people who feel the way I do or who like the same things that I do. I'm not going to have to kind of basically be in the closet about everything about my life, right? And I think when you grow up, not being able to have that outlet or feeling like you have your tribe, I guess, like you kind of get used to this idea that, okay, I'm just going to have a life of being closed down, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah, exactly.
so like it's really freeing being able to kind of realize otherwise.
Do you think that it's okay if I just change our region to Central Europe or South Africa?
What do you mean? Well, region where?
Like our region is currently US West.
Okay, sure.
Because Trey says that we're just, there's a distortion, but apparently it's just my mic.
I can't really hear anything, but okay, sure. Just your mic. Hold on.
Okay, I've changed it to South Africa.
Yeah. Give me 2 seconds. Just gonna restart
Jakabe?
something really here.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Give me 2 seconds.
Let me know when I need to say something.
Cool. Just gonna
No worries.
quickly restart a thing. Maybe that will help. Let's see. Okay, I think we let's continue. Trace, keep us up to date if anything goes wrong.
Yeah. All right. So your story.
Oh yeah. That was pretty much it. I was just saying it's really freeing being able to to find a place where you can be yourself around other people. And I think that's more than anything what the furry fandom has kind of allowed me to do, be more comfortable with who I am, and realize that who I am is not something that needs to be hidden.
Mhm. So I mean, and your time is around about the same time as like Max Black Rabbit and
Ebony
shoot,
Leopard.
yeah, Ebony Leopard and so on and so forth.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, were those names that you were familiar with at the time, or was there sort of like a time period between when you found the fandom and when you found, people within the same, I guess,
Like other
perspective?
black people
Yeah,
within
yeah,
in
yeah,
fandom.
yeah, yeah.
Actually, it took me a long time to find other black people in the fandom. It I can't remember when it happened, but I think yeah, Ebony Leopard, Max Black Rabbit, Ken Sample, who's a big macrophile artist.
All right.
Oh
Those were
goodness, I remember. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Carry on.
yeah, like those were the kind of like the first black people that I knew about in the fandom. And for a really long time, I I was kind of like the black one in our social group.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's seeing other black furries being kind of vocal
Mm.
about their blackness, and us kind of like getting together and comparing notes and like war stories about our time in the fandom and how we grew up has
Mm.
been really, really cool. I think that's one of the big changes I've seen recently within the fandom, is that we're starting to kind of incorporate our human sides, if that makes sense too, like the
Mm-hmm.
cultures that we've come from, who we are as people, and the spaces that we occupy socially and politically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a part of our identity, and we've kind
Mm.
of taken those on now, which is I think really cool and encouraging to see.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's definitely it because again, going back all the way to 1996, and especially I think 1996, around about 1997, like the only connection that I had, for instance, about freedom of like a large amount of things within South Africa was I was just a person who was in someone else's country, work or not even working, obviously not working, but I was very naive to a large amount of things that had happened in a large amount of time. I mean, 1995, for instance, South Africa won a Rugby World Cup for the first time since being readmitted. In fact, like it was the first time that South Africa had been readmitted into the rugby world, sort of on a sports level. And I still remember, like, I don't know, falling asleep on a couch somewhere because my father had taken myself, my sister, and my mother. We were all watching us playing this sports game against, it was New Zealand at the time. And it was a different thing. It felt completely and utterly different, and especially for me, like having these kinds of experiences, I felt a lot more connected with people around me from like all walks of life.
Oh
Um,
yeah, for sure.
but obviously, the furry fandom isn't a lot like that. It's still what's it majoritively? I think if I can remember the last poll was like 80 something percent. White orientated, whereas the rest is a very sort of extremely vast mix of different people within it. Like, and how does one deal with that, for instance? How does one deal with the idea that like there's a large amount of people, but like the idea of being able to find a group of people to feel maybe in some senses safe with, how does one sort of begin to sort of bridge that gap, especially currently within the political system that is the furry fandom?
Well, it's interesting, I think, because my relationship with my own race has been I'm not sure how many other people have had that same experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so I grew up really different. And, I've been like bullied and kind of ostracized a lot, growing up. So I never really felt that safe around other Black people until really recently. Uh, and for me, the furry fandom actually was the safest space that I had for,
Mm.
many, many years. Um, and coming back to kind of like the Black community after kind of learning about like Black geeks and Black nerds, Black people who are into like sci-fi fantasy or who are into the fandom, um, it it feels like a stretch to me coming from furry back to kind of Black culture
Yeah.
because of that.
Huh.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
can sort of see
it's
that.
weird.
Well, I can kind of see that. I mean, the whole furry, like, it feels like, despite, uh, let me get my thoughts together. Despite evidence to the contrary, or like, the furry fandom was sort of born on the internet and from the internet. Like,
Yeah.
being able to find like you said, find your group, find your tribe. It was made a lot easier by the internet and things like mucks and zines and chat groups and chat rooms
Everything,
and all that.
yeah.
Yeah, essentially everything that the internet was back in the early 90s.
IRC.
IRC, all
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
jazz. Like so,
yeah,
with the internet comes its own different kind of culture. You're immersing yourself not necessarily in your I don't want to call it your ethnic culture, like your local culture, what's
Yeah.
around you in meat space, but in the internet culture, which is a completely different thing and a scary thing in some cases.
Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
It's Oh,
it's a
go
different
ahead.
kettle of fish completely. Sorry, I'm done.
Oh, yeah, it's really different. And I think for a long time before I actually met kind of furries in real life, my race really didn't matter at all, right? Like nobody uh, really said, uh, "Oh, you're Black. Oh, well, that's gonna be your problem," or anything like that. And like nobody, because I'm going around as like this kangaroo, right? So like nobody's gonna be like, "Well, are you a Black kangaroo or a white kangaroo?" Like
Because
like
that didn't
furry's one
obviously
of the
matter at the time.
right. Like I think furry's one of the few fandoms where when you meet someone, those kind of racial dynamics aren't one of the first things that you see.
And like and that's something that I do want to comment on is that it almost seems like recently it's become far more of an issue. I mean, for instance, now this being maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years. We'll say 2 years. Um, like there's this entire idea of like people jokingly kind of going, "Oh, good, you're a hybrid. I can, cast you out of my sort of friendship group, particularly
Goddamn
because
sparkle dogs.
yeah, shut the hell up." Says the blue. God knows what you are right now, but
Always been wolf, one species.
always been wolf, always been one species. But the thing is that for me, like I've always been evolved. It's always been like, two particular different characteristics of who I am being put together in a format of green and white. And now currently like a little bit of like black markings and shit like that to make it seem a lot more natural in some senses. But like I created a character particularly because on the surface, on first meeting at a large amount of the time, used to be terrifyingly shy, meeting practically anybody. I used to be able to talk to anybody, but the thing is that ask me to do anything beyond that, it's not. It wasn't necessarily a very good conversation, particularly because I don't do, coffee conversations. This, hey, how are you doing? This weather is weird.
Small
Kind
talk
of
is annoying.
I hate the literal shit out of small talk because the thing is that like I'm going into a conversation to achieve something. It may be a better friendship, it may be anything along that kind of line, but Like, where exactly does one be able to do that? I mean, as for instance, as a jackalope, like it's one of the stranger, would I say, concoction?
It's yeah, it's definitely different. Like there aren't a lot of jackalopes around the
Mhm.
fandom. Um, and I so I to your point, like it's always been really interesting to me learning more about how people come up with their personas, right? Like, why a wolf? Why a wolf? Why that color? Why this color? Because it's I think one of the things that makes furry so cool is that you can manifest kind of who you want to be or who you think you are uh, in a more or less physical way, right? All the animals that we choose, it means something. It's meant to highlight like a certain part of our personality or a certain kind of like aspirational uh, ideal self that we would like to be. Um, and it's really cool to have that dynamic where
Mm.
everybody's kind of projecting, who we want to be and having that be accepted and having people kind of play along in
Yeah.
these ways. So for me, being a jackalope is kind of trickstery, but um, also this kind of ideal of fairy masculinity, if that makes sense, right? Like
Yeah.
um, this idea of what it means to be a man, but kind of unbuckled from all this toxic masculinity stuff
Yeah.
that um, that really kind of makes it a bummer being a man.
Mm.
Uh,
You
I
have
completely
to play
understand
for
it.
the
Yeah.
football team.
Yeah.
You have to play for you
Cowboys don't
can't
cry.
play hockey. Well, I mean, field hockey, because field hockey is a girls' sport. You can't play netball because netball is a girls' sport.
It has to
You
be
can't.
basketball.
Goodness
has to
knows
be.
if you play chess, and if you're part of the debate team, you're a nerd almost immediately, and you kind of sit there going like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll go to the gym. Maybe I'll just do all of the things that I need to do to show you that a chess player can, in fact, look like a buff musclehead.
Right.
Which is oddly enough, like there's I had a friend of mine in university who literally did that. The guy had like his master's in engineering, had already started his own company, but kind of also was on the front cover of most Sports Illustrated magazines as best looking man around. And I'm kind of sitting there going like, huh, I didn't realize that was a thing. Also, how
Yeah.
did you find the time?
Right. Like, no, that's it. It never seems fair when there's this guy who's like, oh, I'm really fit. I can do all this other stuff. Also, I just happen to have like 3 PhDs in like this thing, and I'm just like, I kind of hate you right now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a win for me if I make my bed in the morning. I don't know how you can do that. All of that.
Yeah, making your bed. I What is the closest thing I've done? Okay, never mind. Nope, not going there. I'm lazy. End of story.
Yeah. As therapy, I've been sorting through my magic card collection, just putting everything in neat little boxes, getting a little bit of like order into my life, and that's been incredibly therapeutic.
Actually, it is. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the what is it? The life-changing joy of tidying up.
I think
It's this really
I've heard
cool
of the book.
book.
Yeah.
Um, but there was this Japanese lady who was having all these kind of like mental health problems, I guess. Like she would have like a nervous breakdown because like there's all this pressure and she just couldn't deal with it. And one of the ways that she learned how to deal with it was, actually just getting rid of a lot of her stuff and learning how to keep things neat. And it just made her entire life better. So organization, and for me, I love washing the dishes. That's one of the ways that I actually relax. In the, um, yeah, I sound like the most boring person ever. It's like,
No, I actually agree
or
with you. That's the reason why I'm shushing you.
yeah. But like, there's something just really calming about being able to get your house in order that I love, and I
Yeah.
recommend anybody do it. But again,
It's the least important thing that actually has the most important consequence in the fact that like you can wake up the next morning and go, cool, it does not smell like, last week's chicken.
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Like, yeah, there's something nice about walking into a house and going like, oh, I don't have that like 3-day funk smell that's kind of
Yeah.
been peeking
Yeah.
through the walls. Yeah.
Okay.
What's that smell? Lavender? Lilac? These are new to me.
Mint?
Mint.
Why? Oh, geez, I wouldn't even want to ask that. But I mean, like, yeah, lemon and mint put together as a house room smell, like a kitchen smell, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Why those particular smells? But then again, I'm going to detract away from that. I'm not going to let anybody answer that question because that might just be like a 20-minute conversation on its own.
Right. I was like, all right, we can get into like clean smells if you want to, but
Yeah,
it's gonna be a very different podcast.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, for some reason, we always diverge into weather and traffic,
yeah.
like the fucking news chopper. But but yeah, let's try not to do it this evening.
Yeah. So with this like movement into the fandom and everything like that, and like I again like maybe just for anybody who will be listening to this or is listening to this right now, like the previous questions were all based around sort of backgrounding and the society and societal norms and everything like that. What I would like to ask is that like I mean more directly, like how has the fandom changed since you joined in 1996?
God, how hasn't it
Um,
changed?
Yeah, it has.
oh, that's yeah, like it's interesting because I think the fandom is, I mean, obviously it's gotten a lot bigger, right? So,
Hmm.
um, there's just a ton more people. So there's been this kind of like balkanization, I guess, of the fandom, where before, there were a few places where you could expect to find like most furries, right? So, furry muck, some of the kind of like offshoot mucks. Now it's kind of everywhere, and there's not a centralized location for furries as much anymore. For affinity, I think is kind of like the closest thing that we've got to, you know, the center hub
Everyone
of
has
furrydom.
something. Yeah, everyone has a
Right.
furry affinity.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like yes, like some people are in Discord, some people are in Telegram, some people use F-list, some people are still on the Mux. Um, and that's been really interesting to see because with that you see uh, kind of like these subcultures that start popping up, right? So like, uh, gamer furries are gonna have like kind of a different community than fursuit furries, writer furries, artist furries. There are like specific kind of like kink furry communities and all this other stuff. So you've seen the furry fandom just kind of break up into various other interests. Um, and it's not enough just to be like a furry anymore. Like you can't just say like, "Oh, I like wolves," and it's like, "Well, who fucking doesn't?" Right? Like, it's it's more of a like, "Okay, that's cool. Are you into art? Do you want to write? Do you like anime?" Like, and then
Mm,
you kind of get shepherded more into that funnel. Um,
yeah, but yeah,
and because of that, I think we're a lot more honest about um, our ability to get along, I guess. Like when I came into the fandom, and this was I think one of the mistakes that I made, and I see a lot of like new furries making is that, oh, because we're furries, we all have to get along. Like, you're gonna immediately like me because I'm a furry, and it's like, no, not really. Personalities are still gonna be different,
yeah.
and there are gonna be clashes, right? So, um, kind of seeing that and that the ease of pressure of having to like everyone, or feel like we're all one tribe when we're really not, is that's changed too. And I don't want to say it's, better or worse. It's just different.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you think that's for the better or for the worse?
Again, I think it's just different. I mean, it's better in some ways because there isn't that kind of false sense of community that I think can get people into trouble.
I like the way that
But
you're wording that, and I'm going to tell you just now, but carry on.
but also it's a lot harder, or I don't want to say harder, but kind of trickier to find your place.
Yeah.
Right? So I think in some ways the furry fandom isn't as immediately welcoming as it used to be. There's a little bit more of kind of like a barrier to entry,
Little
but
quid pro quos, right?
yeah, or just yeah, there isn't that expectation of hi, I'm a new furry, and then someone kind of leads you by the hand into Narnia, basically. It's more, hey
It's not a
kid,
high
welcome
school
aboard.
anymore.
Yeah, welcome aboard. There are drinks over there and there's snacks over there. I'll see you around. That's kind of the vibe, I think, that
Yeah.
we give new furries more. But again, because the fandom is spread out so much, there are limitless ways that you can kind of really,
Interact.
enter the community and build your identity and kind of find your people.
Hmm. And I mean that does sound like it would be for the better, but I mean, as things stand currently in the furry fandom, there's a lot of things that one could consider to be either wrong or right with the fandom, for instance. I mean, and that also maybe also talking about things like left and right, even the idea of, I think that particularly because our belief systems are so varied, and then there are also
Yeah.
people who attempt to try to take that variation and go, well, then you must be this. It's that entire idea of okay, cool, I'm a jackalope, or I'm a wolf, or I'm a straight up wolf. You kind of sit there going okay, cool, that means that you're part of this group of people. You're also friends and family of the werewolf community, for instance. Oh, cool, you like a large amount of bright colors. That means that you must be part of the anime community / the brony community, sparkle dogs, yeah. Or this and this. And the fact of the matter that we can't necessarily define where we're supposed to be within the group that we're supposed to be defining with makes it both scary and almost freeing in the same sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely different. I think a lot of it depends on I think who you meet up at first. But yeah, there's also that, because I came in kind of through alt horror werewolves, that news group and / IRC channel. So I tried to be aware,
A
or
werewolf?
therianthrope, a therianthrope at first, but that group was way too
Too into it.
Intense?
yeah, too intense. They would kind of you have to prove your bona fides. You have to prove that you're one of us.
You must be part of the pack.
Right.
Jesus.
And
sorry.
it's
Ease up,
it's
clipping the microphones there.
it wasn't fun, right? Because it turns out to be way more performative than real, right? And compared to the furries, who basically are come as you are, we accept you. It's okay if you want to experiment with a bunch of different species, or something like that. That's a much more inviting environment.
Mm.
I don't know what the wear scene is like now, but I imagine it's roughly the same.
Haven't gone back since Yahoo died.
GeoCities. We remember you.
Oh yeah,
Pour one out for
Nippon Philly.
GeoCities.
Speaking of, when was the last time anyone checked on their Neopets?
Oh goodness. Oh no! Don't remind me. It's been years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like my Neopet site is just a graveyard at this point. Just dead Neopets everywhere. It's bad.
I only ever had 2, and like obviously they were green at the time. But yeah, no Neopets. Wow. Does that site even still exist?
I think it does. I genuinely think it does.
I remember there was like some kind of weird stink about it because like whoever took it over was trying to make it.
Yeah, there was some kind of revival thing going on.
Yeah. Nope, it's still around.
But in that same sense, like, what's that other game? You had to download it.
Arcadia? For Arcadia?
Yes, Furcadia.
Oh yeah, I never
Which
actually
is-
tried Arcadia.
Furcadia is still goddamn around. Honestly, so is the Muck. Like, I was actually there sometime this week, actually. I, like, popped on at some point and was like, wow, there are no people here.
Which muck?
Furry Muck.
Oh, furry muck. Yeah, it's like I haven't actually gone on in forever. I wonder if my character's still there. Like
It
it might have
probably
been
is.
toted by
Same.
now. Yeah.
It probably still is. I know that, like, there was a point that for about a year and a half, I left my character sort of stagnantly sitting in. No, Scratch, I would know that your character is still there, particularly because you're still sitting in the same room for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still there. You're still alive. You're
Huzzah.
still sleeping. Max no longer is there, though.
I completely understand.
Wow. But actually, I do want to talk about that for a couple of seconds, particularly because the role-playing scene seemed to be a lot more alive again within like early 2000, late 1990s. Role-playing scene was massively high in the fact that, like, you know, people got the entire idea. Like, Mavs were still a thing, so I don't even know what Mavs stands for anymore. But like, if you missent a
it was a
message to someone,
It was a character actually. That's yeah. So there was someone named Mav who I think just got infamous for doing that.
yeah.
Is that what it
And-
is? I thought it was like a.
Yeah.
I thought it was a post going Maverick.
Mm-mm.
I
going
like that
rogue.
too, but
Yeah, either or. But as far as I remember, I think Jakabe's story is pretty accurate to the one that I know, which is like you missend a message to somebody, particularly because there are so many people online that if you put in a shortcut to a person's name, that sometimes that shortcut wouldn't necessarily connect to the right person anymore. So if you private message someone in a different room or house,
Mm-hmm.
that it would go to someone completely different.
and then they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm sorry.
Who are you?
It's a
Yeah,
Mav."
Mav.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Cat.
Cat?
Okay. Yes. She hasn't stopped for 2 weeks.
Is it tummy time?
Other stories. Okay, let's
sorry,
go.
Like, yeah. So
Sorry, I've been watching.
So is your cat
Day
just
9
kind of-
recently?
yeah. Is your cat begging for attention?
Yeah, in the way that, like, needs to be
Cats
medically
do.
fixed.
Oh.
Yeah. It's been coming for like the last 5 years, and honestly, we've just it normally isn't this bad, but it's been going for like 2.5 weeks now, and it's
deal.
come to the point where she's actually affecting sleep.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
intense. All
she
right,
needs to go to a vet soon. It's yeah. Any case, moving on.
All right. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, beyond this, like, I mean, obviously you say that you used to be a podcaster before podcasting was a thing. So maybe let's talk about the early podcasting scene, especially within the furry fandom.
Okay. Um, yeah, so like it's weird. I don't actually have that much uh history on furry podcasting. Um, but I do know that like, we were doing 2 cents and kind of putting them out as like audio files uh
Hmm.
for for a while. So before podcasting was kind of a thing, it was sort of like that. Um, which is weird. It's so weird to think that like, Two Griffin kind of started this whole like podcasting thing before really it was anything. So yes, credit to him.
Okay, and like obviously, like, and like, I mean, irrespective of the current, I guess, positions that people have taken on respective things. For instance, I mean, like, two happens to be a very big influence in how we actually became more, I guess, internet aware. That
Hmm.
that people were beginning to sort of like look at us for, I guess, any kind of information at all. I mean, how did that sort of begin to become something that what people were doing for that kind of information?
So what do you mean like that kind of
Like
information? You mean like news or?
anything like that. I mean, like some person randomly starting up a radio station, especially in the 1990s,
Mhm.
or like trying to get podcasts out there, or YouTube, or well, what would then be known as, I don't even know what YouTube was in the 1990s, because
LimeWire.
LimeWire, yeah, of course,
Yeah, yeah, basically.
and everything
Um,
would be
I'm just pulling
audio.
out everything from my childhood right now.
all right.
Napster,
But like,
Yeah,
LimeWire,
it's been
yeah,
a
Pogs.
minute since I thought about
yeah.
LimeWire. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because I think the space wasn't quite as crowded, right? So it's kind
Hmm.
of like almost like the podcast equivalent of only having 3 channels, right? Like if you wanted content like this, there weren't that many places to go.
Yeah.
Um,
Fair point.
and it was definitely interesting. Kind of being a part of something that caught, right? And I think that was one of the first lessons that I had as far as kind of a responsibility towards your community, right?
Hmm.
So, we have been kind of given this platform that a lot of people were listening to, and that kind of meant a lot to a lot of people. And so when people would start kind of writing in for advice, um, or we were reporting things that you know people were trusting, right? Like I kind of felt the responsibility of that, right? You don't
Mm.
want someone coming to you for advice or coming to you for information, and you really don't care about getting it wrong, right?
Hmm.
Or that kind of thing. And for me, as kind of like the that whole thing blew up and our audience got bigger, um, it was more important to me to be responsible with what we said or how we said it. um, and I think that was kind of where we started having this rift, because obviously he doesn't feel the same way. He feels that uh, he can say whatever he wants, and it's basically up to us to decide how to deal with that. um,
Hmm.
and I just don't agree. Like if you
Mm.
have a platform and you have uh, a certain amount of fame, you have a responsibility to your community to use that voice wisely.
Oh yeah, totally.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's disappointing when people don't take that as seriously as they should.
Yeah.
No, that's very true. It's a any kind of creator, anyone who puts anything out there has that duty to 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 be responsible and to be like you need to sort of be upfront with people with about what you're going to do with your work, because someone like I'm thinking off the top of my head, there's a guy on YouTube who does Overwatch reviews, Ragtag.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
like he asks people to send him videos of them sort of playing a game, and he coaches them, but he does it like by roasting them as opposed to being like actually helpful. And there are still people who are like, why is he so mean to this? It's like, to these poor people, like they're just trying to get better, or they're just trying to enjoy the game. But meanwhile, people submitted these things themselves, because that's the joke. Like he's an asshat to these poor like bronze or silver players or whatever, but it makes for good content, and they signed up for it.
Right.
So
Like there's a choice that's being given.
exactly, yeah.
Right. And I mean, there is something to be said about like, hey, this is who I am, or this is what I do, take it or leave it. And then, people can do with that what they want. But I personally, I believe that it's not just, even if you've been given like a big platform, it's not even just if you're famous or whatever. I think each of us, no matter who we are or what we do, have this responsibility to the people around us, to be kind and to help each other, and to make the world around us a better place if we can at all. One of the reasons why I think we've gotten into the places that we are politically is because we have lost sight of the importance of community and the importance of looking out for other people. And so now, like, that's a big focus for me. Like, I really want to do something or foster a sense of community, where we can actually, even have disagreements, but still have this common bond, and that's difficult, especially in this day and age, right? Like,
yeah. What's my one motto, Ivik? My one axiom?
Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah, like, don't be an asshole, right? Like, it's
how hard is that?
thing.
Seriously.
Apparently really hard.
It's really fucking difficult.
Yeah, fuck.
And I think there's this weird sense of entitlement with people, where they feel entitled to be able to say anything that they want or do anything that they want without having consequences or blowback. But at the same time, no one can cross them or do something that they find bad, right? Or offensive.
I mean, I was browsing the internet like now, and one of the first things that come out of me is a article by the Daily Mirror, or the mirror.co.uk, about Serena Williams wanted by WWE to step into the ring and become the latest big name wrestler.
What?
Exactly that. Like, I, at the end of the day, this could be fake news. I don't necessarily, like, I don't know. There's nothing to sort of back this up. But, like, I'm kind of in shock. It's like, so the entire idea, what kind of leads you to asking this particular question to the best tennis player in the world.
Because she threw a hissy fit because she lost the game, wasn't it? Sorry.
No, she
yeah.
didn't.
It
All right,
was
I have
like
feelings. So like,
there's a lot
Yeah,
more to that. But
sorry.
yeah,
yeah,
go on. Yeah.
I love Serena Williams, and I have feelings about how that whole thing happened.
Yeah.
And
I'm
I,
paraphrasing by calling it a hissy fit because,
right.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
no,
Something happened
she.
there.
I mean, but and this speaks to a much larger point that might be getting off track. But like the idea of she does have this platform, right? Like she is the biggest name in tennis. So certain standards of behavior are expected, right, of her.
It plays
Uh,
into the previous conversation.
right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there is a horrific double standard for, people of color, and for women especially, about how they express, difficult emotions, right?
Yeah.
So anger or sadness or fear or whatever. Um, they're constantly being policed about their tone and how they, express that. So uh, Serena, slamming down her racket and, crying about something that she feels is deeply unfair and kind of like besmirches her character,
Yeah.
is labeled a hissy fit or a tantrum or that kind of thing. But uh, John McEnroe and like Andre Agassi, like all these male tennis players have done
Name them
the
and
same exact same thing.
there's been a
And
hissy fit.
right, and like it's never labeled that. It's always, oh, he just has like so much passion for the game and he's such a fierce competitor and like he just let his emotions get away from it. We make all these excuses, right, for men that we just nail women to the wall for, and especially women of color. It's deeply unfair. It,
It
it
is.
really frustrates me to see that.
Look at for instance Castus Minya. I mean, in South Africa, she is possibly one of the most like loved sports stars currently. To the point that even I guess I don't know, radical politicians use her name to express a particular point, express a particular way of feeling about things, that like they protect her for who she is. But in that same sense, like the idea of politicizing a event like that happening, it's exactly that's happening in the furry fandom, for instance. Somebody brings out a particular point, be it somebody like Two Griffin, be it like anybody like, anybody who's been in the fandom for a while that has a particular amount of people following them. It's gotten to the point where I feel like they're being forced to take a stance that they're not comfortable taking yet because they don't know where they actually stand on it, because it had at that point never necessarily been an issue.
Or picking a side, like
Yeah.
immediately labels you on the extreme.
I mean, yes, and yes. Like there is
I'm glad.
there is a bit
I'm
of
glad
that.
that we're starting this conversation because
Yeah.
it's something that it needs to be said.
So full disclosure,
Yeah.
total social justice head.
Yeah.
Like I'm very, very left. So obviously I have a lot of disagreements with a lot of prominent like conservative furries or like alt furries and like that kind of thing. And I feel like I can't just agree to disagree on a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, like the thing that kind of, I guess most recently with like two specifically was, the whole suicide thing. I've been dealing with like mental illnesses for all of my life, right? I come from a family where, mental illness is a big part of, everything that we go through. And I see what that does to people, especially when they don't have the resources to kind of get that properly diagnosed or treated, or they don't have the support network that they need in order to actually cope with that, right? And so
Mhm.
those comments about suicide are grossly irresponsible. I
Yeah.
it's so frustrating to have someone with that kind of a platform kind of saying that sort of thing. And not just doubling down on it, when kind of being, hey, this is a problem, but also kind of trying to lampshade it or gaslight people into, believing that he meant this entirely different other thing,
Mm.
Mm.
right? And so with folks like that in our political environment, it's
It's
everybody is problematic, right? Like, so I've had views that were a big problem, and, that were ignorant, that were hurtful.
yeah.
And people have called me out on that before, and like I've had to do the work of actually learning about why this stuff matters and why it hurts people and how I can change, those views and those expressions to be a better person and to
Yeah.
build a better community, right? So with the social justice movement in general, especially online, we're very polarized, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of us could be, kind of calling out these problematic behaviors in a more constructive way, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but it's still that conversation still needs to happen, and these people still need to understand that you can't just say what you want, or you can't spread these views that are demonstrably harmful,
Mhm.
to really vulnerable people, especially within our own community. And it's gotten to the point where like I just can't stand for that anymore.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's one thing when one talks about a political view based particularly on what's the word, monetary lines or political guidelines or whatever. But it's a completely different thing when a political party or a political view stands against a group of people. And I think
right,
that maybe that's what we're getting at here is that like um, there should be no group of people that should be, I think, baselined to the point that this is who you are, this is how we're going to deal with you, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Like, and I think that's the issue that we currently have is that like instead of looking at things from actively just straight up political views and like those political views have decided that these people are not human enough to be considered. This group of people does not understand how the world works today. This group of people doesn't have, all of these things, irrespective of whether we took it away from them or not.
mhm,
Um, that in and of itself is practically the base reason. Like the thing is that, and I think that maybe that's what I get from the liberal movement is that the liberal movement, irrespective of its own other private views on a singular one by one person basis, is that everybody has a view, everybody should be heard, but it depends on whether you as a person believe what they're saying or not.
Yeah, but then those people will cry foul and say you're. Yeah, people who will use their free speech for malicious intent will cry foul.
Liberal agenda.
And
Okay.
I
or
thought
like,
this was supposed to be an inclusive thing. Yeah, well, free speech.
yeah,
The government can't talk
uh,
shit about, can't like block you from saying shit, but it doesn't mean we have to entertain your bullshit.
Yeah.
right. And like I think the thing that bugs me so much about like the whole free speech debate is people who equate consequences with censorship, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And saying that like, hey, I don't like what you're saying. Um, these organizations don't like what you're saying and don't want to be associated with what you're saying, so
Mm.
they're going to take away the platform that they've given you, right? So that's not censorship, right? Those are just the consequences of like really terrible views and
Yeah.
the things that you've said. Um, Free speech is obviously important, right? We want to be able to have difficult conversations or think of things that may be like outside the box or that might be difficult to contemplate at first, right? But there should be things that we just won't accept in civilized society, like questioning the worth of a person
Hmm.
is unacceptable. It and we shouldn't entertain any idea or uh, movement that wants to call that into question. I'm not any less of a person just because I'm black. That full stop. End of conversation. We don't need to have like this is not debatable.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the difference between the right and the left as far as kind of like shutting down speech goes. Is we're arguing that these people are questioning my right to exist,
Yeah.
and we should be past to that. That is unacceptable, and
Yeah.
we will not tolerate that.
Hmm.
Those ideas. And to have the other side saying, oh, well, this is just a political disagreement. It's like, no, what you're advocating for is, at best, me being a second-class citizen, and at
Yeah.
worst, me being eradicated from the planet.
It's
And
it's literally like the all-encompassing lyrics from a band called Discharge back in 1982, which was actually covered by Metallica a bit later, called "Free Speech for the Dumb." It's that entire idea, isn't it? It's that like, and honestly, "Free Speech for the Dumb" as a song, it's two stanzas, 4 lines each, literally just saying "free speech for the dumb." And like, in and of itself, it's possibly the most powerful thing that we've had in I don't know how long, is the fact that like, and sorry that I'm sort of detracting a bit, but the thing is that music from the 1980s all the way up until round about mid 1995, possibly 1998, was everything against this particular idea. You had bands coming up out of fucking nowhere, like talking about anything and everything that was on their mind. I mean, again, Discharge, Metallica, like any metal band that you can think of between that particular period, Linkin Park, any of those particular bands, even punk band.
Blink,
No, the other one,
Sex Pistols.
the really good one that became super popular again after creating a hand holding onto a hand grenade.
Oh, Green Day.
Yes.
Green Day. Yeah.
You want to tell me that like songs and lyrics like that with Green Day, with now the other band Pearl Jam, do you think that like at any given point what they were trying to say isn't coming true now? And yet somehow we managed to look past every single bloody one of those things, saw 2 planes fly into 2 buildings in 2001, and then decided to forget everything that we decided to speak about between then and now.
Well, I think with September 11th and a lot of what's happening right now, people are afraid, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
fear really does just short circuit a lot of the things that makes humans
Human.
humans,
Yeah.
right? So with September 11th, it was mostly awful because I don't want to say like the terrorists won, but they inspired terror in the American populace, and we're still seeing the effects of that to the present day, right? A lot of the anti-Muslim sentiment, can be traced right back to September 11th. and even kind of before that. Um, but with 45 and his administration kind of stoking a lot of these
Yeah.
fears, it's what we're seeing is a society that is giving itself over to this fear, and uh, the behavior that is inspired from that is just really base low level behavior,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And so you see that in like the alt right, right? I mean, like they're not monsters, right? Like, they're people just like you and me, but at the same time, they're scared. And that fear is causing them to do things that are monstrous and wholly unacceptable. And the thing about fear is that once people give themselves over to it, it becomes impossible to reason with that, to kind of snap them out of it, because there's no reasoning going on, right? It's all instinctive,
Yep.
Yeah.
and that's where the discourse is now. Like, a lot of people on the right are just way too frightened
Yeah.
to think about stuff for a second, right? And so they'll just accept whatever they're told. It doesn't matter if it contradicts the last thing that they were told or it's blatantly not true. It doesn't have any basis in reality. If it does anything to ease the fear or give them a, a way out of that, they're going to take it. And I think that's what we're seeing is just a lot of people in this country are so afraid that they have stopped thinking. And that's what makes these times so dangerous.
Yeah. And I mean, and like, I know that we're sort of focusing on this for a couple of seconds or for the last 15 to 20 minutes, but the thing is that like it's part and parcel of the issue that sort of sits with the furry fandom currently. I mean, again, 1996 to now, things have changed. Things have changed to the point that, like, if I listen or hear about like these famous furries, for instance, that, and I look, I'm not necessarily putting them down or anything like that, but our focus has become so self-centered that the stories, for instance, that we put onto YouTube, the kinds of pieces of like little bits and tidbits of who and what we as a society are, happen to just be so self-centered. And again, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that it's not a bad thing. We should put ourselves out there. That's what half the other people do to get famous. Like, you literally have to put yourself out there and say, you know what? As a kid, I used to stab myself in the arm because that's just how I used to be able to do this and this and this. But at the end of the day, like that kind of perspective, that kind of thing, both dehumanizes who we are, as well as makes us this public spectacle. And that public spectacle is that, like, if I get out there and say that this is what I did when I was 13, that would mean that my next video has to be one step up from that.
Like,
Yeah.
I've just told you who I am. I've just told you what I've done. And then everybody's like, ooh, that's some juicy little gossip right there. You know, that, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I mean, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why south-afrifur exists the way that it does. It's not about getting the name out there. It's not about getting like 200,000 people listening a large amount of the time. It's about getting stories out there. And if somebody hears your name and then searches for your name, there is somebody talking to you, representing you. That's our point. I think that's been our major point for the last 4.5 years now.
this is like everything you've sort of just said has been straight up Black Mirror of season 1, episode 2 that I watched this afternoon. It is so like right there.
That is straight up my favorite episode of Black Mirror because
Really?
I think
I'm
yeah,
slowly working through
because,
it, but yeah.
yeah, it's, I mean, like they're almost all of the episodes are good, but like that one I think really speaks to me, and I think has only grown more prescient over time.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we're seeing, especially online, is this pressure to build who we are into this brand, right? So like we're actually getting into this weird space where we have to perform ourselves um,
Mm.
in order to feel like we connect with people. We can't actually be ourselves. We have to perform who we are as like a brand, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that can be that can trap you, right? Like if you develop a certain level of fame by expressing this particular aspect of who you are, people will come to expect that, right?
Yeah.
And there's always that fear that like, well, I'm changing, right? Like I would rather be doing this or I'd rather be saying this, but am I going to lose followers for it?
Yeah.
Or, is my Patreon fundage going to go down because I'm going in this different direction? And that's hard. That's a hard thing to navigate. Um, it's I wish it weren't so. I wish we could be more authentic and honest about who we are, and not just that, but the malleability of self, right? I mean, if you are a good, thoughtful person, you're going to change over time. Like the
Yeah.
things that you thought were funny or acceptable, in your 20s is going to be different, by the time you hit like my age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And you're
and
not
I
that
think
old either, are you? I
like,
mean,
I'm 38, so
it's still not
like
that old. You're
kind
not
of up there.
this
But
this coming from two people who are in their 30s now.
Mm-hmm.
okay. All
You're
right,
only 8 years older than we are, so
all
I
right,
mean,
cool.
yeah.
I'll take that. Actually, that makes me feel better. Thanks. But and one of the things that I think we have to get better about, as especially on the left, is allowing people that room to grow
Mm,
and change and develop. We see a lot of people, who have done unacceptable things like in the past, right? Like 10 years ago. Like I am sure that if you dig up my like online stuff from
mm,
like 10 or 15 years
mm-hmm.
ago, you will find something that is terrible. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um and people still get nailed to the wall for it. And I think that's a little bit of a problem because you're not incorporating like the ability to change and develop um, into this social paradigm that we're constructing,
Yeah.
right? And so if someone is going to be nailed to the wall for like a 15-year-old tweet, and they're like, that's not who I am anymore, that was unacceptable, blah blah blah, and people don't accept that apology or just like write you off completely, what incentive is there to
To say
grow and
sorry.
change?
Yeah.
Right.
But in that same sense, and I think that that's one of the things that Twitter and the I'm going to call it mob mentality for now.
Mhm.
But
The hive
thing-
mind.
the hive mind,
Kill them all.
sorry,
But like
I'm-
call out culture,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what is necessary, I think, from the person who is being called out for something that may in fact be a legitimate issue, is that if you are truly, apologetic about it,
Mhm.
admit that it happened, admit that you've done wrong, admit all of those particular things, and say that you will be better than that the first time you get called out. Because I think that's the major issue here, and I think I've seen it far more often on Twitter nowadays, that when somebody gets called out about something, they come up with an excuse, then another excuse, then a different excuse, and then an excuse directly after that. All of them sort of closely sort of going like, okay, cool, yeah, no, but it wasn't this, it wasn't that, it wasn't those things, but I'm going to prove to be a better person. But the thing is that like you still haven't acknowledged the initial problem that you put out there. You did not acknowledge it. You did not acknowledge what you did.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Like a lot of people don't know how to own up to really crappy behavior. And I
Yeah.
think especially in this day and age where so many of us are just putting all of ourselves out there, like even like the ugly bit,
Yeah.
we need to be able to take responsibility for ourselves in that way
Yeah.
and say, yes, I did that, I said that, it was unacceptable then and it's unacceptable now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've worked really hard to change that, like, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I think if you're sincere and your actions, kind of back up what you've said, people will accept that.
Yeah. I've seen it
I think
happen so
it's,
many times in our fandom.
hmm
But you think it's
oh, I was gonna say, like, I just think that it's not just apologizing, it's actually showing up and doing the
yeah.
work after that
Yeah.
is also really important. And that's one of the things that we don't see people do
Yeah.
as often as I'd like.
I mean, you consider any recent call out that's happened, one of the biggest or some of the biggest ones that have been called out. Every single time any of that sort of stuff happens,
Mhm.
there's a small waiting period, the person responds, and then all hell breaks loose. And every single response has always been, yeah, but.
Yeah.
Don't yeah, but when you know that you've done like that's the, I mean, like as a 30-year-old person, like my parents taught me this 20 years ago. Don't make an excuse for your shitty behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
Own up to it. Know what you've done wrong. Understand the consequences and
grow from
be
it.
a better person. Don't
Right?
be
Yeah.
a dick.
Right. Yeah. Like, just take the L, right? Like, take
Yeah.
the loss, move on, and learn what you can from it. Like, another thing about, like, I think the internet culture and us just being performative all the time is, we are afraid to fail.
Yeah.
We're afraid to admit our flaws, our mistakes, because we've seen how mean the internet can be, with any sign of weakness. And I get the incentive or that reflexive action to kind of protect yourself or protect your ego.
Mhm.
Um, but you have to check that, right? Like, you have to kind of move past that to really be a good person.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's easy. It's very difficult, but it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bind that a lot of people are in now, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, if and I don't like this about myself, but I can't help it. If like someone came up to me and said, I voted for 45, I'd be like, we have nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
You're blocked. Like, I'm just like,
Yeah.
this conversation is over, and like there's no room for me to forgive that right
Yeah.
now.
Bless you.
And I realize that I probably have friends who did vote for 45, and they will not come to me and tell me about it because I've been so vocal about this, not only on Twitter, but now on this podcast and like about everywhere else. And that's a problem, right? Because
The discourse doesn't continue. Yeah.
exactly, right? Like, now there's no chance to have that conversation about like why that happened or how we can move past it. But at the same time, my view is you've had 18 months looking at this fool do everything to prove that he would not be a good president or responsible with the power that position holds at all. You've had a year and a half to know that this was a bad idea, right? there are
I
no
think-
excuses
Yeah.
in my mind.
At this point, no.
Yeah.
I think,
Anyway,
it feels to me like prejudice like that is like some kind of like social survival mechanism kind of thing. Like that knee-jerk reaction is sort of how you evaluate a threat to you in a social circumstance, more so than like fight or flight. But yeah, like since we don't see lions around every bush anymore, like when our society's evolved to that point where we need to take the actions of other people into account for our own safety and whatnot, I think that prejudice is still a little bit of the lizard brain going, whoa, danger.
yeah, I think actually that's a good point, right? Like I know for me, there are all these signs, like just as I move throughout my day. Like if I see someone, like wearing a MAGA hat,
Mm.
or or displaying like the American flag prominently, right? Like it tells me something that like, oh, this person is probably against me and mine, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gotten to the point where I feel like that's an existential threat to my life, right? Like if you're a Trump supporter, I have no idea what you're going to do.
Mm.
But chances are it's not going to be great for me. So, yeah, I'm just going to shut that down. Like I don't have any room, for it. I'm not going to be like, are you one of the good ones? Right? Like
But
Yeah.
it's in respect to that idea of room, it's just that like it's less about not room for wanting to have the conversation. It's less about wanting the room to have the disappointment that may come with it.
Well, right. And I think it's more than disappointment for me, at least, because the consequences of getting something
Yeah.
like that wrong are very high.
Yeah.
If you let people like that in, there's the
Sorry.
chance that you could be doxxed,
Yeah.
that you could be harassed,
Mhm.
Online, or that, your life could just be upended, for
Yeah.
no other reason than they wanted to, and they think you deserve it because you hold these beliefs or that you're different.
Like, and I know that Scratch doesn't necessarily see it as much as I do sometimes, but it's ever since we had a particular podcast, I've been seeing a large amount of mail, a large amount of things happening that are beginning to worry me just a little bit.
For real.
Yeah. And it's actually beginning to make me question whether I should become vocal about it or not, because at the end of the day, like, I have friends, I have people that I care about that may not necessarily care in the same way that I do about particular issues that I want to protect, that I want to make sure don't get put into a firing line. And the very fact of the matter is that, like, it's that fear that makes people want to do it more. It's that entire idea of, I know you're afraid, so I will do this more. I will do that. And at the end of the day, like, I mean, luckily, we're still a small channel. And that's literally sometimes the only thing that I kind of hang on to is that, like, we've been around for 4.5 years. But because of the way that we've done things, the word is out there. People who want to listen will listen. People who don't care don't have to listen. And they won't listen, and that's fine
Right.
by me. And that's the reason why we keep, the format the way that we do. Super long videos. Nobody's going to watch and listen to that unless they're interested. If people who don't know you, for instance, may not necessarily listen or want to listen. But the people who want to hear more from you will listen, because they follow you and they know that that's out there. Your voice is there. That's the kind of platform that I feel that YouTube is lacking in a large sense. It's not like we put our photos or like our videos up with, like, hey, watch out, we're going to talk about something really racy today. And then, or for instance, politics, 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 kind of like everywhere. People are going to go, ooh, clickbait. I love this. That's not the point of the podcast. The point of the podcast is to hear who you are, hear what you have, hear what your beliefs are, and understand like what you are. Where do you come from? And that's literally the point. That's the point of who we are. But if
And-
it get yeah,
Oh, I was going to say, and I think that's really important, especially right now, because the fandom is incredibly diverse,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely possible to be in this fandom and kind of feel isolated and kind of feel alone. Like I didn't realize how important it was for me to know other Black furries, right?
Mm.
Until I actually started to talk to them and get to know
Mhm.
them. So like folks like Witchy, right?
I
Um,
love Witchy.
yeah, Witchy's amazing, and I'm so glad that I've gotten to know her. Um, Spotted Menace, Thunderdramon, a couple of those people. It's really really nice to have someone who not only shares my aesthetic and the things that I'm interested in, but also the background and like how we grew up, right? Like
Mm.
we've had those same kind of uh, community pressures exerted on us,
Mm.
and so we can talk about that like honestly and be open about it, in ways that like you couldn't necessarily with someone who has never had that experience.
Yeah.
And having a platform to put that kind of thing out there is really important, and I think it's necessary. So thank you guys for doing this. It's pretty awesome, and I'm glad that I was able to be a part of it for at least one episode.
Yeah, well, we'd love to have you on again. In fact, like big sort of projects that I'm considering doing is that like we want to have like, what do you call it? A whole group of people. What is that called? A
round
forum.
table?
A forum
Oh yeah.
of like people that we've either spoken to or not spoken to, all around the same question, all around the same sort of table, and talking around, say, 5 or 6 questions for like 2.5 hours, hearing your perspectives on them, hearing the question. This is your answer. This is your answer. That kind
Oh
of
yeah.
thing. Because
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to do that actually.
okay, well, we'd love to have you on. I mean, the thing is that, and that's one of the more interesting things is that like of the people that we've actively spoken to amongst Tanya, you, Witchy, the vast majority of you have been in the fandom for honestly longer than myself and Scratch have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the only I'm not even sure if Dalmy, like for instance, has been in this fandom for shorter or longer than we were, or what his age actually is for that matter. But at the end of the day, like the question, of course, just remains: what happened? What changed? And how have you guys sort of weathered it? Because
Yeah.
yeah.
So like I think I mean if you're speaking about like kind of racism or like racial
Mm.
issues or
Yeah,
political issues in the fandom,
Mhm.
I think there's always been kind of like an undercurrent of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the burned furs were around, like 20 years ago, right? So there's always been that kind of element where, the fandom kind of gets politicized in some way. It's just that because politics are seeping into every aspect of our lives, um, it's harder to get away from.
Yeah.
And I know that I personally changed. Like I became way more political after kind of the police brutality uh, thing got really big. Michael Brown in like Ferguson, Missouri, was this kind of big turning point for me because it made me realize like no matter how different I guess I feel I am or um, how much I don't see myself as like, a typical black person, right? Like there are some people who are only going to see me as this black person and are going to treat me accordingly. Like if I get stopped by the police, I could die,
Yeah.
and nothing I could do is ever going to change that, right? That's just the reality of the world that I live in. And I had to speak up about it, and I couldn't stop, I guess. Not, or I couldn't not address it.
Mm.
So for me, that was it. Like I'm very not okay with confrontation. It stresses me out like you wouldn't believe. But we need to have these confrontations now.
Mm.
There's just no way around it. And I think a lot of people feel that way too.
I mean, and like even from a linguistic perspective, like I've been doing a large amount of like conversation with my own students. I mean, like the vast majority of my students are majority black. I mean, black South African people from different walks of life, Zulu, Xhosa, Shona, whichever one you want to sort of like call. They all exist within their own platforms, and like one of the most interesting things for me is that like you don't necessarily know the kind of excitement that comes around when you as a person from the outside comes in and says, I want to know what the hell is going on.
Right.
And immediately you get bombarded for like 2.5 hours from your students saying, this and this is part of our culture. This and this is this, and like this is happening, and we don't necessarily like them that much because of this. Like, and it's just the very fact of the matter is that, and what I really realize, it's not that nobody's unwilling to talk about it. What they really want to know is why do you want to know? Are you going to use this information against me at some point? And if you show true intent as to what you want to do with something, what you want to do with that kind of information, again, I mentioned it's not even about platforming for us. It's just you have a story, we want to hear it. Like that in and of itself, it's there's an innocence to it that makes people just open up, and I think that's necessary. I think that we need to be able to want to open up about something. Like it's the entire idea of like, what, you've been a shitty person, why are you a shitty person? And then they sort of look at you for like 2 or 3 minutes and then sit there going like, well, it's because this shit happened to me in my life.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is what true, I think, humanity is supposed to be about. I mean, like it's that same argument, for instance. Now, not all, for instance, all that hashtag not all kind of bullshit that happens like all the time is particularly an entire idea of trying to mask whatever insecurity you have in your own fucking life. Like, that's the reason why it's not all, because I do not want to be associated with these people, but the fact of the matter is that I still do that, and I'm not willing to own up to it. Like,
and no one really wants to see themselves as the villain, right? Like, I think a lot of that is when someone goes like, white people suck, right? Like, or white people are just murderous jerks. People want to be excluded from that because they don't want to take that on, right?
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable, not only to sit with your privilege and what that affords you, but also take responsibility for the really terrible things that your tribe have done historically, right? That's uncomfortable, and a lot of people will do anything they can to get rid of that discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my time is up. Unfortunately, I really have to go.
No worries.
But this has been great.
We didn't even get to like half the things about you, for instance, and that obviously means that we're gonna have to have you on again.
Okay, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, like, what, you're a writer. There's so many other things that you've done. If you want, of course. I mean, your partner is around somewhere, as far as you've mentioned. We'd love to have
Yes.
like a conversation with both of you, for instance, about how you found out a whole bunch of other things. But thank you so
yeah.
much. Thank
That
you
would be
so
lovely.
much for being here.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's been super fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
And-
great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
it's Jakabe. So that was Jakabe. For those of you guys who are listening to us live, and he's gone offline. We're still live. That was Jakabe. He is our guest for this evening. He will be up on YouTube a little bit later. We will, of course, be on within the next 10 to 15 minutes with a little bit of music for anybody who's still listening to us here on furry.fm. Beyond that, this was Ivic Wolf and Scratch.
Yep. Signing off. We shall see you guys again next week, probably.
Next week. Couple
Cool.
of things. Have a
Alright.
good evening.
Nice. See ya.
Cheers, guys.